Shalom. Now, when I was very, very young, when I was like, before I can even remember, 2, 3 years old, every morning, my grandfather, I was raised by my grandparents, my grandfather would head off to work. He'd have this aftershave smell of him, and I'd give him a big hug, and I could still feel his cheek on my cheek. And they'd be gone. He'd go off to work. I'd go off to either school or kinder, or just hang out. And when he got home, he'd give me that same big hug, that bear hug, and that kiss. And I can still feel his cheek, but this time his cheek was because being a Jewish guy, Yiddish guy, my grandfather grew hair. He'd be like a Dr. Seuss character. Hair everywhere, just by the end of the day. But I can still to this day feel, and he smelled of sweat. Now don't get me wrong, he was a white collar worker, he worked in an office, but it was at the old school where he'd work up a big sweat even doing that work. And we'd have dinner together, my grandma, my grandpa, myself, and we'd tell stories. They would tell stories. I was lucky because they tell stories about family members and people from the Torah. Seamlessly, go back and forth. So for my family stories like Uncle Murray in Miami Beach, they were sacred stories. And stories about Sarah and Avraham in Ur. They were stories too, and they were family stories. They overlapped. Well, after dinner, my grandpa would go into his room, and he would change into something more comfortable. Back when changing into something more comfortable was actually changing into something more comfortable. And while he did this, every day I did the same thing. I would go into the front room and I would get the bridge table from up leaning against the wall because it was all folded. And I would get the table out, and it must have been really big, so I must have had help from my grandma, but it was really big, and I'd move it all the way over, and I'd open one leg. Then I'd open the second leg. Then I'd open the third leg. The fourth leg. And I'd sit it up in the middle of the front room in front of the old black and white TV. And then I'd get my grandpa's chair and I'd put it right where it always went. And then I would go and I would get the deck of cards. The very special red deck of cards. Still in the little package. And I'd place it on the lower left of the table. And when that was all done, magically, my grandpa would appear in the front room. Bathrobe, boxer shorts, slippers, black socks, old 60-something little knees. He was an old man, but you can still, what a presence he had. And he would sit down in his chair, and I would sit underneath the bridge table. And he would open the deck of cards, and he would start playing solitaire above my head. And all I heard was him playing solitaire for the longest time. And under that table, that was my sukkah. That was my sanctuary. All those things that made me afraid as a nonverbal autistic child, they were so far away. At that moment, they scared me during the day, and I was frightened. But under that table, in that sanctuary, in that sukkah, with my grandpa, I was completely safe. And I no longer was alone. And that entire table hugged me and kept me safe while my grandpa played. And in my 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old mind, I thought that I had created all this. That I had built this sanctuary. And because I built this sanctuary with all my heart and all my soul for someone I loved so much, he dwelled there with me. My grandpa stayed there with me. And I was safe. And I had the empowerment to make that place safe by building that sanctuary. And to this day, I still feel that feeling sometimes of being under that bridge table with nothing but that pitter-patter of those cards raining on my roof. Thump, thump, thump. So with your families, go and build those sanctuaries and feel safe wherever you can with the people who are closest to you. Shalom.